Early in 2023, we received word that our daughter Bethany was expecting a child. Turns out she was expecting two. She had twins. And for 2 months, that was the case. And then at the end of 2 months, one of the two children in her womb died. And so she carried successfully a male that she named Calloway. And because of a pituitary tumor that she's had for many years, it became very difficult for her to become pregnant because of hormonal issues related to the pituitary. And they were very careful to see doctors onward through the pregnancy. Sometimes twice a week they saw them. And Calloway was strong, had a strong heart. He was healthy, but they were constantly watching Bethany's blood pressure. And a few weeks back, just a few weeks before her due date, her blood pressure went up at 3 in the morning, and she went to the emergency room. And by 11 o'clock that day, she was scheduled for a C-section. She went into the operating room. She had already had a C-section with her first child. It all went well. This time things were different. What was a healthy baby, when she went into the operating room, complications occurred, and Calloway struggled for his life. Because the placenta was anterior in the front of her abdomen, they had to cut through the placenta to get to him, which we're told is not uncommon, but it means that you better get that baby out quickly. It took the surgeon 3 attempts to get Calloway out. By the time he was removed from Bethany's abdomen, he had stopped breathing. His heart had stopped. Someone from the NICU had been alerted and was standing by of the possible problem, and there was. And when he was removed lifeless, they worked on him for 18 minutes. And Bethany said she'll probably never forget the sounds of the compressions and the word breathe. After 18 minutes, they were able to revive him and took him into the NICU, where fortunately there was a NICU doctor, because at that hospital in the evening hours, a pediatrician is the doctor in the NICU, who is not as qualified as one trained in the NICU as a doctor. And so there was a doctor right there. They attempted to put blood back into him because he had essentially bled out. And while they did that through his umbilical cord, the doctor was on the phone with Emory Teaching Hospital in the heart of Atlanta, about an hour away. And he was telling Emory that he didn't think that the baby would make it. And he was preparing in his mind that while Calloway was still breathing and had some life, even though he was limp and not responding, that he wanted to get Calloway into the arms of his mother so that she could hold him just for a few moments while he was still alive. And while he was on the phone, for some reason, Calloway managed to pull out one of the leads feeding blood into his umbilicus. And the doctor hung up and immediately attended to Calloway. And he told Bethany sometime later that Calloway fought him to get that line into his abdomen. And he realized that he needed to get Calloway to Emory as soon as he could, because there was a possibility that Calloway would survive. Now, when you're born dead like that, the most important thing they tell us is to get the baby cooled down so that his brain doesn't swell. And there was only one ambulance in the Atlanta area, an ambulance service called Angel, that does nothing but transport babies in need from one NICU to another hospital all throughout the Atlanta area. They placed a call, and that ambulance was not only available, but was nearby and was able to get there within moments to begin cooling down Calloway on his trip to Emory. They have 6 hours to take that baby and get him cooled down in order to prevent the swelling. He survived the trip. He got to Emory. They hooked him up with all kinds of leads for his brain and all through his body, tubes in his abdomen through his umbilicus, and he began to respond. At first, they didn't know what would happen to him, being dead for 18 minutes. They found through a scan that he probably had blood clots in his abdomen. His lungs were bleeding. His liver wasn't responding. His kidneys were not putting out properly. They thought he might have some brain function, but they didn't know how much. And to bring a long story shorter, within the span of 3 weeks, Calloway was home with his parents, fully recovered. They couldn't find any blood clots a few days later. His lungs began to clear up. His liver began to show full function. His kidneys showed full functions, but they didn't know anything about his brain. So they scheduled an MRI, and that took some time, days. We were all on pins and needles, continuing to pray. And we didn't know the results of the MRI. They thought, well, if there was brain damage, he would survive and he could go home. So there was no rush for that. But when they did the MRI, Calloway fought them. They sedated him through something in his nose, some drops. But the drops didn't take, and he fought that. But they said, we got enough pictures that we think we can evaluate it. And within an hour's time, a nurse practitioner came into the room where Bethany and her husband were and said, we found no damage to his brain. Normally we expect to see some signs of trauma in the brain, even with babies that are delivered normally. But he showed nothing. His brain was perfectly healthy. See, Bethany and Jonathan were able to take home a fully functioning and fully healthy baby after 3 weeks. And the NICU doctor that saved his life said he has never seen a baby survive like that and come back that quickly and that fully. Prayers were offered, as Leslie has already said, by many, many people. And God heard those prayers. But Bethany and Jonathan, they went into the hospital that morning believing that they would give birth to a normal, healthy baby. They were walking out into the desert believing that they would find water. And after all the trials in the operating room, with Bethany not hearing any cry when the baby was brought out, and all the compressions and breathing for 18 minutes, said to a midwife that was at her shoulder, "Is he all right?" And she said no. After a couple weeks, he was transferred from Emory back to the hospital where he was born, to that initial NICU, for maintenance at that point, to get him feeding fully, to make sure he was taking all the ounces he needed every day. That took a few days for him to get serious about doing that. 3 days walking through the wilderness and finding water, only to find the water was bitter. You couldn't drink it. And Bethany said, "Why does so much have to be so difficult?" But there was a testimony for Calloway. The doctor that was the anesthesiologist, who turned out to be a believer, who Bethany and Jonathan bumped into in the hallway when Calloway was brought back to that NICU, said he had never in all of his career experienced anything as horrific as what he experienced in that surgical suite that morning. So much so that he actually called the NICU nurses some days later to see how Calloway was doing. He was concerned about that. Jonathan, one night, trying to make it easy for the family, bought pizza at a local pizza store. And while he was there, the nurse that was doing the compressions on Calloway in the operating room was there and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "I'm so-and-so. I was the nurse from the NICU. How's he doing?" And she said she went in she knew that he was being transferred. He already had a story to his life. And she said, "I'm not on for a few more days. Would it be okay on my day off to go in and see him in the NICU?" That's the kind of interest early on in his life there was. Why did they have to go the 3 days in the wilderness to find water that was bitter? Only God's plan. Only God with a testimony. Sometimes we have to go up a mountain. I heard that sung the other day. Sometimes God gives us mountains. It's a Gaither song, to get our attention. But you know, that isn't always the case. It isn't always that there's something in our life that God wants to get our attention, and so he puts us through a trial in order for us to come back to him. Sometimes God just wants to work miracles that he might receive the glory. And I held Calloway in that NICU because one day Jonathan was sick and couldn't go, so I went with Bethany and I got to hold him with some of his leads still on him. God in his mercies wanted the world to see, for some reason, his love for Calloway. Where sin abounds, grace did much more abound. But you see, the next station the Israelites go to in which Israel arrived was altogether different from Marah, like Calloway, that bitter water made sweet. At the one, everything was naturally barren. There was no supply for their wants. It was only the power of God which could sweeten those bitter waters. At the other, Elim, there was an abundant supply of water, exactly adapted to Israel's wants. 12 wells of water, a well for each tribe, and a refreshing shade, for there were 70 palm trees there. And we see here at the very outset that Israel's journey through the wilderness was a checkered one. There was a mixture of trial and mercy. Marah, with its bitter waters, intervenes between the triumphant song at the Red Sea and Elim with its 12 wells of water. What a picture this is of the Christian's life, when dark hours are followed by bright ones. And if your path is smooth and bright now, if Israel's song of praise strikes a response in your heart, you mustn't think that it will always be that way. Some trial of faith will surely be sent to you after a season. Rejoice then, but let it be with a calm and hallowed joy. Sing Israel's song, but take care that it's never exchanged for Israel's discontented murmurings. We ought to be thankful, but we should take heed of self-exaltation. For he that exalts himself, whether on account of his temporal or spiritual blessings, shall be lessened. But if, on the other hand, God is calling you now to taste the waters of Marah, and you are discouraged on account of the weariness of the way, are you ready to surrender and think that there will be no more provisions for you? Yours may be a lifelong sorrow. The world may appear to you desolate and most weary, and yet you may receive comfort and strength from above, and it may be very much nearer to you than you suppose. The pillar of cloud may guide your faltering steps to an Elim, where you will sit down under the shadow of Jesus. The wells of living water will be open to you. Remember the beautiful words of Jesus in John 4:10. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Remember the gracious invitation. If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. And why should we not encamp like Israel of old beside the well of living water and drink abundantly? Our fountain of life is not limited to one spot. Our shelter is not in one place. As the Christian journeys onward, Jesus has unfailing shelter. His fountain of life goes with him. The pillar of cloud pauses at Elim. Don't encamp beside the broken cisterns of this world, which can hold no water, but pitch your tent beside the waters of life. By daily meditation on the Scriptures and constant prayer, draw water with joy out of the wells of salvation. And my God shall supply all your need according to his riches and glory by Jesus Christ.